We're in a series called Joseph, A Life of Integrity. For some time now, Joseph has been a favorite Bible character of mine. Not because he gets it all right, but because he has such a big view of God, and it affects literally his dreams and his choices on a daily basis. We're going to re-engage with Joseph as he chooses to forgive those who have hurt him badly. I remember hunting for elk in the state of Montana a number of years ago. When you're walking mountain trails, you travel as light as you possibly can. Well, the guy that I was hunting with seemed to be carrying a lot of extra stuff, extra bags and so on. By noon, he was almost worn out. Well, we sat down to have some lunch, just sat down on a rock, and he said to me, I suppose you're wondering what's in these bags and why I'm carrying them around. I was a little curious. He said, well, I'm pretty attached to this first bag. It holds a big rock that I stubbed my toe on about 3 years ago. Oh man, that hurt so bad. I was sure my toe was broken. I hate this rock so much. Well, then he pulled up another bag and he said, in this bag are a couple of hammers. This first hammer I whacked my thumb with back in 1979, and I thought I was going to lose my thumbnail, and my thumb was broken. The second hammer whacked me about 3 years ago, and these two hammers are so offensive to me. I just can't stand them. And now this third bag probably will really surprise you. And I thought to myself, no, probably not. He pulled out a stuffed cat, and I was surprised. And he said, this cat used up the last of his 9 lives after scratching me one too many times. Hey, I love dogs, all right? How ridiculous for my friend to be carrying around all of this baggage, right? But don't many of us insist on doing the exact same thing when we refuse to forgive someone? We carry around emotional baggage. We carry around spiritual baggage in some of these same ways. Paul says in Galatians 5 that Christ has set us free. Why? So that we can be free, so we can live free. Today I'm talking about freedom from the pain of our past that can only come through forgiveness. And Joseph is a great example of how to forgive well and live free from the pain of the past. We join the story in Genesis 45. Joseph said to his brothers, I am Joseph. Is my father still alive? His brothers could not answer him because they were dumbfounded before him. Joseph said to his brothers, come closer to me. So they came near. Then he said, I am Joseph, your brother, whom you sold into Egypt. Now do not be upset and do not be angry with yourselves because you sold me here. For God sent me ahead of you to preserve life. For these past 2 years there have been famine in the land, and for 5 more years there will be neither plowing nor harvesting. God sent me ahead of you to preserve you on the earth and to save your lives by a great deliverance. So now it is not you who sent me here, but God. Wow, so Joseph has already forgiven his brothers for all that they did to him all those years ago. And he shows us, I believe, this big idea that we can live free from the pain of our past. We can live free from the pain of our past. And we're going to see 3 ways that Joseph does that in his life, in this situation. First, let God be the judge. Let God then work out his plan. And number 3, let go of the offense. I often talk about forgiveness because it is so crucial to our lives. The reason this hits all of us is that we all sin against God and each other on a regular basis. We can't live free unless we know that we are forgiven and that we have forgiven others. A favorite song of mine is called The Living Years, and it was written and recorded by Mike and the Mechanics a number of years ago. The last verse says this: I wasn't there that morning when my father passed away. I didn't get to tell him all the things I had to say. I think I caught his spirit later that same year. I'm sure I heard his echo in my baby's newborn tears. I just wish I could have told him in the living years. And then the chorus repeats again and again. Say it loud, say it clear. You can listen as well as you hear. It's too late when we die to admit we don't see eye to eye. It's an awful thing to need forgiveness and not have it granted to you. You know that fellowship has been broken, distance has been created in the friendship. But it's even more destructive for us as individuals when we know we need to forgive someone and we refuse for one reason or another. It's the kind of thing which can hold us in a paralyzing grip or turn our stomachs into a mass of knots. If offenses are held onto and they turn into bitterness, they have the power to stop all spiritual growth and give Satan a foothold in our lives. The good news is that we don't have to live in the pain of the past anymore. We don't have to live as victims. We can live in victory and we can receive healing. We can live free from the pain of our past. First, by letting God be the judge. Let's see how Joseph does that. Joseph had a right perspective, I think, on his own role and God's role in history. Genesis 50, verse 19. Don't be afraid, he said. Am I in the place of God? We sometimes get that all turned around, don't we? We think that we know and we know all the facts, we can judge and so on. Are you and I capable of being totally unbiased? We certainly don't know the whole story. We don't know the big picture of hardly any situation, right? Do we ever have all the facts and see all the sides of the story? We need to have the perspective that God is in charge. God is in control. Let God be the judge. Joseph also had a right perspective on sin. Here's his response to Potiphar's wife who tried to seduce him. Genesis 39, he had said, no one is greater in this house than I am. My master has withheld nothing from me except you because you are his wife. How then could I do such a wicked thing and sin against God? Here we see Joseph as he is confronted and tempted with sin. Since sin is, first of all, against God, and God sees the big picture, let God be the judge. This will bring freedom from the pain. Judgment had already begun to fall on Joseph's brothers, and we see that in several ways. Part of it is just the idea of living with the consequences of your sin, right? Genesis 42, Reuben replied, didn't I tell you to not sin against the boy? But you wouldn't listen. Now we must give an accounting for his blood. The brothers didn't realize that Joseph could understand what they were saying because he was using an interpreter. And so he's hearing their whole conversation and realizing these guys have been living with the consequences of their sin for over 13 years. Such a bunch of guilty consciences. Could it be that a part of God's judgment on someone who has sinned is that he has to live with the consequences of that sin? Sometimes that's the case. If that's what was happening here, there was likely never a day in the 13 preceding years that the brothers had not thought about what they had done to Joseph and wondered, when is Joseph going to show up? Hoping that actually he really was dead. Genesis 42 says this, at the place where they stopped for the night, one of them opened his sack to get feed for his donkey. This is after their first visit to Egypt. He looks into his sack and he says, my silver has been returned, he said to his brothers. Here it is in my sack. Their hearts sank and they turned to each other trembling and said, what is this that God has done to us? So they're very, I would say that they're paranoid, but God's really doing something here. So they're not just imagining something, right? So the brothers return at a later date. And here in Genesis 43, the man did as Joseph told him and took the men to Joseph's house. Now the men, the brothers, were frightened when they were taken to his house. They thought, "We are brought here because of the silver that was put back into our sacks the first time. He wants to attack us and overpower us and seize us as slaves and take our donkeys." And it's almost funny that they're in such a panic here because of their guilt. They're feeling such guilt. But the other part of that is that Judah, Joseph's brother Judah, has begun to have a change of heart in these years. Genesis 44, Judah speaks to Joseph on behalf of Benjamin, trying to save Benjamin's life. "Indeed, your servant pledged security for the boy with my father, saying, 'If I do not bring him back to you, then I will bear the blame before my father all my life. So now, please let your servant remain as my lord's slave instead of the boy. As for the boy, let him go back with his brothers. For how can I go back to my father if the boy is not with me? I couldn't bear to see my father's pain.'" Judah here he's a picture of Christ and Christ's substitutionary death for you and for me. When he offers himself for Benjamin, he passes Joseph's test. Joseph has been toying with them, testing them to see if there has been any heart change taking place. Finally, Judah's sacrificial offer completes the test, and Joseph can't contain himself any longer, and he reveals himself to his brothers. But he let God be the judge. Because of that, he wasn't living as a victim of his past or living in pain. He was living free. He was living free. How do we let God be the judge in our lives? Well, I think the first thing is to examine ourselves, just to pray, "Search me, O God, know my heart. Is there any deceitfulness, any sinfulness in my heart?" And then acknowledge the hurt and the hate that we've felt as a result of this offense, being sinned against, someone that we need to forgive. The best way to deal with our emotions is simply to acknowledge them, not to stuff them down, or to live totally by our emotions, right? We acknowledge them and say, what are these emotions? Why am I feeling so much hatred right now? Why am I feeling such depression right now? What is this telling me about what I am believing is true? And then confess that we don't know everything, right? Declare that, God, you're the one who knows. We will never be God, who sees the beginning from the end, who knows what is in the hearts and the minds of people, who is perfect in wisdom. Let God do what he does best and what we do so poorly. Understand that because of the cross, forgiveness is both right and possible. We so quickly justify ourselves and condemn our opponent. We prefer to judge our sin as less and theirs as greater. But here is the big picture. God has already judged all of our sins and declared us guilty. All of us, sentenced to death. But he didn't stop there. He then paid that death penalty for our sin himself, and he offers us life instead. When we, by faith, receive his free gift of life, he declares that we are free from shame and blame. At that moment, we are also free to come close to him, to know him, to love him, and obey him. Forgiveness is possible for me and for you because of Jesus. We can live free from the pain of our past by letting God be the judge, and then by letting God work out his plan. Genesis 45 says this, "Then Joseph said to his brothers, 'Come close to me.' When they had done so, he said, 'I am your brother Joseph, the one who sold you into Egypt. And now do not be distressed and do not be angry with yourselves for selling me here, because it was to save lives that God sent me ahead of you.'" Joseph recognizes that in the end, it wasn't his brothers selling him into slavery that brought him to Egypt. It was God's hand that was working out his plan. What an amazing perspective to have in the middle of the crisis and the pain. And we know that it's been 13 years now. So there's been time that has passed, and hindsight, 2020 vision, and all that. But Joseph believes that God is in control, and that God is working out some master plan, some amazing plan for his glory. He has such a strong sense of God's control, God's timing, and God's heart. How else could he have given such a confident interpretation of Pharaoh's two dreams? Genesis 41, Joseph says, the reason the dream, he's talking to Pharaoh here, Pharaoh's had two dreams now, and Joseph is interpreting. He says, the reason the dream was given to Pharaoh in two forms is that the matter has been firmly decided by God, and God will do it soon. How did he know that? How could Joseph say that? He himself had had two dreams more than 13 years ago, which had still not come to pass, but they're about to. He's on the edge of it. He's just on the edge of it. The only explanation is an intimate knowledge of God, which boldly proclaims, I know God. I know that God is working out his plans for me. I will let him do that no matter how I feel today. Well, how do we let God work out his plan? Do you and I really believe that God is working out his plan for his own glory and for our good? Romans 8:28 says, and we know that in all things God works for the good of those who love him and who are called according to his purpose. How do we do this in a practical way? Let God work out his plan. Well, I think the first thing we have to do is to remember that God knows what he's doing, and he is doing it. And so this points, I think, very clearly to the idea of studying God's word to know what he has said, what he has spoken, what he has taught, what he has shown us about his character, right? Trust that God has your best interest in mind. Live that way today. Know that this issue will not likely be resolved in the next 30 minutes or the next hour, maybe even your lifetime. But there will come a time when he will show you all things and how they are being made right and just in his eyes. This is not just about you. This is not just about me. This is about God getting glory in the world. Then decide that you will live with the consequences of the offenses against you. Just because Joseph forgave his brothers didn't make the consequences of their choices go away. Forgiveness doesn't remove the effects generally. Restitution can sometimes do that in a way. Maybe you've heard the saying, unforgiveness is like drinking poison and hoping that the other person will die. Another way to think of it is that forgiveness takes away the poison from the sting. When we forgive, we are saying, I commit you and me to God, into God's hands. He has accomplished and will deliver the final justice, and I choose to live free of the bitterness and the resentment. I'm going to let it go and let him be the judge and let him work out his plan. Thirdly, let go of the offense. Let it go. Joseph holds nothing back. Joseph had truly forgiven them. He had let it all go. He's totally free now to love his brothers once again. Perhaps not trust them fully, but he's free to love them and be close to them. Many of them don't believe that it's real. You can tell by looking at what happened after their father Jacob died. His brothers came back to him to be sure that he's not going to punish them now that their father is gone. Genesis 50. When Joseph's brothers saw that their father was dead, they said, what if Joseph bears a grudge and wants to repay us in full for all the harm we did to him? So they sent word to Joseph saying, your father gave these instructions before he died. Tell Joseph this, please forgive the sin of your brothers and the wrong they did when they treated you so badly. Now please forgive the sin of the servants of the God of your father. When this message was reported to him, Joseph started crying. He wept. Then his brothers also came and threw themselves down before him, and they said, "Here we are your slaves." But Joseph answered them and saying, "Don't be afraid. Am I in the place of God? As for you, you meant to harm me, but God intended it for a good purpose, so he could preserve the lives of many people as you see this day. So now, don't be afraid. I will provide for you and your little children." Then he consoled them and spoke kindly to them. Letting it go means that I will never bring this up again and use it as a weapon against you. I will not demand repayment or vengeance. I will let all of that just be in God's hands, and I will just let this go. We might want to say, but if I let it go, then they're off the hook. They're going to be free. No, they won't. Even if you let them go off of your hook, they're still going to be on God's hook, and God has the final say. God has the final judgment and the final call. If you don't let them off your hook, then you're going to be hooked to them no matter where you go or what you do. You understand? You say, "I will never let this go." And so no matter where you go, no matter what you do, you're going to be holding on to this. Or they're going to have a hold on you. They're going to be in control of you in that sense. You have to let it go so that you can be free from that. When God is the judge and God is working out his plan, then it's much easier to say, okay, it's not in my hands anymore. I have to let it go because it's out of my hands, really, truly, literally. One day, long ago, the innocent Son of God was beaten and tortured to death. It was the ultimate injustice. On that day, he paid the price for your sins and for my sins. One day, everything will be brought to light. One day, everything will be made right. Today, you and I need to let go of the offenses and the offenders against us so that we can live in light of that day. How do we let it go? How do we let the offense go? We must choose to forgive. Let me tell you a short story. Back in the year 2000, Laura, my wife, was severely hurt emotionally, damaged very severely by a couple of friends. And it kept having a hold on her, an effect on her, a huge weight on her for probably 4 years or so. Finally, she was able to come to the point where she could choose to forgive. And what she did was this. She sat down and wrote a long letter to her friends, probably 12 pages long, just describing everything and how she felt and everything, and then saying to them, "I forgive you for this, I forgive you for this, I forgive you for this, I forgive you for this, and because of God's forgiveness for me, I'm going to let this go now." Then she took this letter, these pages, out behind our house, and she put them in a big metal bowl, and she lit them on fire. And as the pages burned and the ashes drifted up into the breeze and floated away, she knew that she had actually forgiven and actually let it all go, and she sensed a lightness and a freedom that she had not known for a long, long time. We need to choose to forgive when we let it go. It might mean that you sit down with a piece of paper or a whole tablet of paper and write down the list of offenses against you and those people, and actually list it all out, and then say to God, "God, I forgive this person for doing this to me. God, I forgive this person for doing this to me. I'm going to let you be the judge. I'm going to let you work out your plan. I'm going to let this go now so that I can live a life of freedom. a life of peace, a life of joy in you. We can live free from the pain of our past by doing these three things: letting God be the judge, letting him work out his plan, and simply letting go of the offense and allowing him to do that. God set us free so that we could live free. Let us both freely give and receive forgiveness for the sake of his church and for the sake of his glory. Amen.